the real God taketh heed, lest a sparrow fall. But the God created from human vanity sees no difference between an eagle and a sparrow. Dr. Abraham Van Helsing. Hey everyone, I'm The Aries 1999, and today we're doing another video on theming a D&D game around, well, a theme. We've already done this for dragons and constructs and plants, but since the undead is one of the most diverse creature types, this is probably going to take many videos. This time we're zooming in on vampires. Let's start with the general adventure. Now, Curse of Strahd is widely considered to be one of the best 5e modules. It contains information about the Ravenloft setting and in region of Barovia. Even if you don't plan on running a full Curse of Strahd game, this book can be an instrumental resource to pull inspiration, characters, settings, and even miscellaneous quests from. This tends to be the way that I just like using modules. I'll take quests or events from one book and just plop them into a game that I'm running. Now, aside from Strahd, a vampire can be a great boss in any adventure that features undead. The party might be, exploring a castle, traveling the underground, or investigating a series of bloody murders. Ooh. Now, exploring the castle would be a classic D&D dungeon crawl. They'd go from room to room and floor to floor, fighting monsters, engaging with traps, and trying to solve puzzles. And at the end of it, they'd run into a vampire. Maybe they were hired to take out a vampiric lord who harshly rules over the land. Maybe they have to save someone who the vampire captured. Or maybe another ancient force has held a grudge with him for a long time and just wants to see him dead. Now, traveling through the underground can make things interesting, because the vampire won't have to worry about his normal weakness to sunlight. Something like this is actually happening in my Enter the Dungeon campaign. Thitch the monk and Earthmover the alchemist were told by the town guard that undead were popping up across the city. They were asked to investigate, so they went into the catacombs. While down there, they met a vampire named Clyde, who was about to turn a man named Al into a vampire. They intervened, and they actually poisoned Al, because Al decided that he would rather just die than be turned into a vampire. As you can imagine, this very much earned the wrath of Clyde, who chased the party as they ran, and ended up giving Thitch a vampire bite, but we'll talk more about that later. Lastly is the murder mystery. The party learns that the residents of a town are being killed one by one. When they investigate, they realize that all of the victims have puncture wounds in their necks and seem to have died from blood loss. They could find more clues suggesting that the killer targeted houses following a path out from the center of the city. And this would give them a great hint as to where the next target might be if, for example, alternatively, maybe they find that there's a strange old man who rarely leaves his home by day and avoids all of the local temples. So maybe they'll just try to attack him in his own house. Either way, I think it'd be interesting that for each night they fail to catch the killer, there's one more vampire minion that they have to fight when they confront the original vampire. Now, having to go up against maybe, half a dozen vampire spawns might be too much, so let's take a look at some alternate vampiric monsters. At the beginning of this year, I released a video about obscure undead and how to make your own undead creatures. One of the ideas I gave was applying vampiric traits to humanoids, so let's explore that idea further. First feature is the natural weapons, which, means claws and fangs. The claws, let's say, do 1d4 slashing, but they can do 2 attacks per round, and the bite is 1d4 piercing, but heals the vampire by as much. Then, depending on the level of the encounter, you might upgrade the damage die, or say that they do bonus necrotic damage, or maybe you say that they can use both claws and a bite each round. For defenses, we'll say resistance to necrotic damage, and resistance to damage from non-magical weapons. And they can also have a base armor class of 12 plus dex instead of just 10 plus dex. They can regenerate, let's say, 5 HP per round. And go ahead and tack on the vampiric weaknesses, so they need permission to go inside, and they take damage from sunlight, as well as being harmed from, running into running water. Now, you have this stat block, you can just go ahead and apply it to commoners, town guards, bandits, or any other humanoids. Go for it. And by the way, I think that this vampire template can be just a great thing to add to just monsters in general, even at a low level game. Like, for instance, maybe the party is storming the house of a bunch of bandits to try to get the loot back from a party, and turns out that they're actually vampire bandits. There you go. Now, what if instead of a weaker vampire, you want to take vampires and make them even stronger? Luckily for you, I have a video on making stronger creatures for battle, but I'll summarize some points here. Point 1 is spellcasting. Giving them even just a few cantrips can greatly change the dynamic of a fight, but there's no reason why you can't go for higher level spells. Let's say for instance you give them something like Firebolt. Boom, you just gave them a ranged ability so that way if they need to, they can retreat and still be able to attack the players. And vampires have had a number of powers throughout folklore, and spells are a great way to imitate that, but we'll go into more detail of that idea when we talk more about vampiric player characters. Don't worry, that's part of this video. Number 2 to make the vampire stronger is to give them feats. There's a lot of fun feats out there like, Crusher, Sharpshooter, Shadow Touched, Telepathic, Elemental Adept, and Mobile. And number 3 is to give them more lair and legendary actions. Maybe the vampire can, redirect a lake of lava or summon some bat minions. Go crazy, have fun with it. Now, let's transfer into player characters. As I mentioned above, vampires have had a lot of powers across legends, folklore, and pop culture. And so, you have a lot to choose from when making your character. And I think in order to really figure this out, we need to describe a vampire in some broad terms. And to me, that would be a creature that lives for a very long time, feeds on life force energy, and has advanced abilities. Maybe that's super strength, maybe that's commanding lightning. Now, in-game, you might say that your character is a type of vampire. Perhaps they derive their powers from a very specific strain of vampirism. Or maybe being a vampire has a genetic quality to it. Perhaps instead they just are interested in vampires and they want to model their power set off of them. With that in mind, I'm going to go through some different build ideas, and these build goes up to level 9. Now, since a lot of these builds are built around spellcasting, I realized that it would take too long for me to go through each build and separately justify each spell and character option. So instead I'm going to run through the general idea behind common spells and touch on what makes each character unique. First, Longstrider and Jump, because vampires are very athletic. Spider Climb, because vampires are known to walk up walls. Featherfall and Levitate, because vampires can be floaty. Miscellaneous necromantic powers like Animate Dead, Speak with Dead, Spare the Dying, and Gentle Repose, because vampires have powers over death. Stuff like, Fog Cloud, Wall of Fire, Control Water, because of their elemental abilities. Phantom Steed, Insect Plague, and Speak with Animals, because vampires have connections with various animals. Some various plant spells for similar reasons. Vampires have command over vegetation. And then there's also some miscellaneous stuff in here with, invisibility and shapeshifting, because vampires are animorphs and really good at blending in. Aside from that, the specific spell list will be on screen if you want to pause to read them, and it will be linked in the description below. First up is Enchantment Wizard. This is focused on, vampiric hypnosis and mental manipulation. Flashing lights warning in 3, 2, 1. Wash! Brainwashed. We'll say that they're perhaps, a high elf for the weapon training and, the long life. And since, elves enter a trance instead of sleeping, that can work well for resting in a coffin. And then here's the spells. As you can see, most of them are based around, mind control. Pause if you want to read it. Otherwise, we're transitioning in 3, 2, 1. Death Cleric. We're going to go with Changeling so that they could get some of those vampiric shapeshifting powers. This one should be pretty straightforward. Vampires, Masters of Death, Death Clerics, Death Powers, etc. As you can see, various, death spells, as well as just some classic cleric stuff that I felt like I had to throw in there, like Thaumaturgy and Spiritual Weapon. But hey, maybe you could theme those around vampirism when you use it, like a vampire weapon. Next is the Fallen Aasimar Swarmkeeper Ranger. So for this one, your swarm is your brood, and instead of the usual suggested appearances, perhaps it looks like a group of bats and other rodents. Spells here are mostly dealt with, the vampire's ability to interact with animals, and the blind fighting because, I can imagine vampires just being able to have, with their acute senses, just hearing and smelling where their foes are in a battle. Next is the fighter with the Plane Shift Vampire race, because, that's an official player race. Dracula, he was a skilled swordsman, and he was very strong. Fighters, they have got the second wind to imitate that vampiric healing. And the samurai archetype, I think, works best here for, the vampire's timeless wisdom and unkillable confidence. Since we're going for a suave swordsman here, I would say the dueling fighting style. As you can imagine, this is by no means an exhaustive list. Like, for instance, I didn't even touch on the druids, and they can actually just anamorph as one of their natural features. So go ahead and put in the comments if you have any vampiric builds of your own. Now, if you've been following my videos, you know that after I talk about how to make a build using official rules, I like to present a homebrew subclass. And so today I'm going to present you with the Way of the Vampire Monk. This was made by me and my friend Chris. He's the guy that plays Thich. So here we go, Way of the Vampire. Monks of the Way of the Vampire specialize in draining health from their foes. By studying forces of life and death, they can use their ki to draw on the powers of the undead. Now, the main thing that they get at level 3 is, as you can imagine, a draining punch martial arts technique. By expending ki, they can deal extra damage to their foes and heal themselves. In addition, they can resist necromantic damage and then become a lot more stealthy. At level 6, they can naturally regenerate HP. Level 11 makes their attacks stronger, and they're able to hide a lot better, including the ability to not appear in mirrors or cast a shadow if they want to. At level 17, they get the ability to jump a lot higher and a lot further, and they get a flying speed when they're in dim light or darkness. Okay, almost done here. One last thing before we go. My good friend Andres, the guy who plays Earthmover in Enter the Dungeon, made a set of prestige classes based around magical diseases. One of these was for vampirism. If you're unfamiliar, a prestige class is a special class that can be multi-classed into, but you can't really select it at level 1, and it has special requirements in order to get it. And they only have a few levels instead of, as you can imagine, all 20. I can do a whole nother video talking about these magical diseases, but let's quickly look at vampirism. Now, this starts actually with a level 0 feature. The idea being that if your character contracts vampirism, they'll have some effects, but they won't have to take a full level becoming a vampire. At level 0, they get a weak bite attack that powers up as they level, but they also take some damage from direct sunlight. Level 1 is a regeneration feature. Level 2 gives you a spider climb, as well as decreasing the negative effects of the sun. Level 3 lets you heal back damage when you bite people. Level 4 lets you charm people, and level 5 lets you raise ghouls under your control. Now, in-game, this is a strain of vampirism, so if you die with it, you will rise again as a vampire. This can make for some great roleplay moments, where a character may get infected intentionally to cheat death, or maybe another character who sees this as a crime against nature will do everything within their power to get their vampirism cured before they die. Now, maybe instead a character just happens to die while infected, and a DM brings them back as an NPC. As I mentioned in my Undead video, stuff like this can be a great way to bring back old characters if a player had to leave the game and is now visiting. So perhaps a player knows that they're going to have to move away, and so they have a big boss battle as a send-off. The fighter sacrifices herself to defeat the Count, then she goes down for the Count, and one day the player is back in town for what feels like longer than you can count, and the DM lets her dust off the same fighter, but with vampiric qualities. Yeah, that's a story I would gladly recount. You know, at some point while I was writing that paragraph, I just went all in on the word count and just decided to stick with it. Yep, this is going to be the final version of the script. Anyway, something kind of like this is happening in my Enter the Dungeon game. As I mentioned, the monk Thich was bitten by the vampire Clyde. So he now has a vampire bite. But he was able to wash the bite with holy water, and now he is working with the Raven Queen. So he is safe from vampirism for now. That said, he does have the mark, and he is in direct communication with Clyde, so it could go either way. Recently, they were fighting trolls, and things were getting really close to the edge. And in desperation, Thich drank troll blood because Clyde had told him that would let him imitate powers of creatures if he drank their blood. It temporarily gave him the troll's healing factor, and it ended up being just enough to let them win. And so now he knows that, hey, he could use this power anytime he wants. He could drink a lot of blood, but the more blood he drinks, the closer he becomes to a true vampire, and he really does not want that to happen. Well, that's all I have for today. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. It's been in the work for months now, and so I'm really glad to have finished it. If you want to listen to the Enter the Dungeon show, it's linked in the description. You'll also find videos for my obscure undead and 30 uses for the spell Prestidigitation, as well as the, plant, draconic, and construct videos that I've done this style. Until next time, I'm the Years 1999. Have a great day, and God bless.